I'm going to submit my formal opening statement for the record. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm grateful for the leadership of Senator Flake on these issues. I have a lot of very pressing concerns. We have extreme challenges right now with our diplomatic efforts in Somalia. I was very taken by the fact that we had our Secretary of State in the midst of a very important trip to the continent of Africa, having that trip undercut by continuing disorder, chaos within our diplomatic corps. I'm concerned that we don't have an ambassador placed here. I'm concerned that at a time where we have a region in instability, we don't have an overall strategy everywhere from Syria to Yemen. We have proxy wars and competition going on that are deeply affecting this area. We have a state that is showing signs of progress, but still ranked as one of the most corrupt states in the country. There are a lot of really pressing issues, not to mention the security concerns we have. Frankly, something that Senator Flake has been a leader on, along with some of my colleagues, about just under what authorization are we using military force, who are we targeting, and again, under what authorizations. There is so much within this topic that not only deals with a real crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a security crisis, but also with larger themes and larger issues that are affecting the globe as a whole and American security overall. I read each of your testimonies with great appreciation, what you prepared for us in a written way, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation. There's a lot going on in Washington today, and he and I are both split between numerous committees, had to leave a very pressing conversation about gun violence in our country. But this is so important, and America's role, as you all know, is essential, especially at a time that China's influence is rising in that region. So let's get to the conversation. But again, I'm just so grateful to my colleague and friend, Senator Flake, for hosting this committee hearing. So again, I'm grateful, as Senator Merkley said, for you all being here. And so I'm just trying to get this from a larger perspective. And I think that Dr. Bacon, your name is very intimidating to me as a vegan, but I'll go forward anyway. That competition between the things that Al-Shabaab is providing, the way, if I could synthesize, and you guys can tell me if this is too simplistic, but I'm really looking for a governing strategy for this committee about the things that we need to be putting influence on. And I appreciate some of you got very, Dr. Hogan, you were sort of like very specific at the end of your testimony. This is what you guys should do, and you had 3 very good points. But let me just say, tell me if I'm getting this right. One of the most important things I think Mr. Hashi was saying is that we're not going to win I shouldn't say win as if direct competition, but we're not going to succeed unless we have a strong functioning government in the country. And it seems to me that if I can, I'm just sitting here taking my notes, that there's really 5 things that are undermining the success of the government. The first one is just the ability to provide security for a nation, fundamentally important. The second thing is these external threats. I would even call them environmental threats. We have a serious problem with global warming that is causing just drought after drought, and we're about to have what seems to be another serious drought that's going to add to the humanitarian crisis, undermining the government's legitimacy. The next thing, Mr. Hashi, you just said very plainly is a government of that size just doesn't have the kind of resources it needs to provide for its residents, which drives another one of the 5 things I would say, which is just the outright corruption. And then you add to that the geopolitical issues, or you have the competitions between Qatar and the UAE. Those 2 seem to be the 5 things, and you have an Al-Shabaab that's capitalizing on a lot of these things by, as you said, Dr. Bacon, providing less corruption, more fair, providing resources, providing security. And so the pressure points that I would be looking for, strategies from this committee, would be what can we do to help with those things? Because, again, I have some serious concerns about our military strategies, even though our increase in drone strikes obviously has had collateral benefits of adding to security, but it's not going to win this. This is not going to be won by military, nor would I really want to see, if there's things we're not doing to achieve these ends, putting more American lives in jeopardy, and frankly, putting more doing things that often I think in the long run add to more security concerns when you fly drones and have collateral civilian damage. Now pair that with, again, the fact that AMISOM is saying they're going to be pulling out. So can I just deal with these things real quick, if I can understand? Number one, the humanitarian crisis. Mr. Yarnell, that's serious and pending. And you're telling me that the things that we should be thinking about, if I hear you clearly, is one, is humanitarian aid is making a difference, and two, America's moral authority of shutting down our borders to Somali refugees. That's something, these are two things that this Senate committee and the United States Senate could be dealing with, making sure we're putting resources in to deal with a agonizing humanitarian crisis. And number two is, hey, step up on this issue of refugees. Stop letting the Canadians out-American us.
As a dual Canadian-American, I appreciate that reference.
Yes.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, providing robust humanitarian assistance, to use a phrase that others have used, is that it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. The assistance provided by Congress saved lives at the same time, as others have mentioned, when the U.S. is putting tremendous resources into supporting the Somali government and trying to eradicate corruption, help it expand its governance, defeat al-Shabaab. If the country experiences widespread famine, that just, drops the bottom out of those efforts. So I think that you achieve multiple objectives by responding with a robust humanitarian.
Anything else I'm missing that if you want to advise us to deal with this humanitarian crisis and the coming drought that I think we're going to see again? Anything else that we should be thinking about before Jeff and I go, Senator Flake and I go on to the next thing of the day?
I just can't emphasize enough the positive impact the funding played last year. I know that there's often funding fatigue, but it's not the kind of thing where you can just provide assistance now and then the next year will be fine. The successive rains have been eroding the capacity of Somalis to respond to drought, and so it's going to take multiple successful rains before people can get back to their previous pre-crisis levels. So to think that just because last year the funding was strong, that we're out of the woods, I think is short-sighted. So just keep that message strong.
Anybody else want to add something to the humanitarian issue before? That's my takeaways right now. Is okay, fine. Then these two, I would maybe say the same solutions: the rivalry, the rivalries in the region, this proxy war that seems to be playing out in details, as well as the corruption. To me, we're not going to achieve those. We're not going to deal with those things, but for great diplomacy coming from the United States of America. That's got to be the way you deal with this: is having diplomatic strategy that is focused on diminishing the rivalries going on between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. All of this playing out in that region is really going to take a diplomatic effort beyond the staff capacities of Senator Flake and myself, correct? Yes, okay. And then the same thing with corruption. I think that's probably two things. One would be, again, having an ambassador there in place to have straight talk, carrot stick talk with a political leadership in that country. And I think Mr. Hashi's pointing out, there's also a resource problem that in some ways is fueling the corruption. Am I correct in assuming that there's a need for the American role that would most be desirable would be focusing on diplomacy and resources to do help with institution buildings that can insulate from corruption? Mr. Hashi.
Thank you. Yes, if all the problems that you have mentioned and others listed, if they are not dealt with, and some of them rather urgently, al-Shabaab will be the net, beneficiary of this. Basically, this government is just so weak. It just cannot withstand all those different pressures coming in. And I think one thing the Somalis can do, what they can do is to just get the politics right. If they just actually understand, this congested, global system where, the attention of the U.S. is required in other many different places, or, the attention of others or the UN or whatever, they need to take advantage of the opportunities they have, the attention they have, like the one that you are giving to Somalia today, and just, do the things they can do. They can actually fix, issues of corruption and others. And somebody was talking about SNA, the Somali National Army. I think, yes, maybe there's corruption of the leadership, but the rank and file, they have just paid so much, so much, and so many of them have died in the past 6, 7, 8 years. Maybe more than 10,000 people died fighting with Al-Shabaab. And there are units that the U.S. supports that has been effective, well effective. So, with mentoring and hands-on help with certain institutions, Somalis can do their part, and the international partners can also help. So, Somalis need to get the politics right, stop unnecessary squabbling. The U.S. and others can actually tell, the external actors their interference is enhancing and helping Al-Shabaab. That's actually super urgent. Otherwise, the Somali government system will just weaken and weaken, and that just makes Al-Shabaab the winner. And also extra help to make, we don't have to do the same thing again and again for 20, 30 years, and then expect things to improve. It won't improve whatever we are doing together as Somalis and our international partners.
So just to wrap that up, then, clearly security is needed. It's not, there's a threat if UNISOM ramps down too quickly, but what we really need to be doing, and some of the aid that we're providing in terms of military assistance, is helping the Somali National Army. But as we've said, and again, I think Senator Flake said this well, it does really remind me of the challenges in Afghanistan, in the sense that if a government can't provide security, it undermines the legitimacy of that government and its effectiveness. Look, I want to wrap up if Senator Flake will allow me one last area, just some insight for me, because I think that the former Secretary of State was focusing on just the influence of China in the region, and some worries I have about creating situations where there's a greater African debt in general. But is that a concern? If I look at a strategy for Somalia, is the Chinese are playing a constructive role to the ends that I outlined, or is that something that you would say, hey, Cory, red light here? You should be concerned and focused on a pernicious influence when it comes to the Chinese in Somalia. Anybody can take that.
I'll just quickly say China is not in Somalia yet. They happen to be in Djibouti and in the neighborhood. But if things settle down, I'm sure they will be close to us.
So I just want to say, in conclusion, way over my time, but I just have some concerns that we do not have a strategy coming from the State Department administration. And that lack of strategy and doubling down on doing the same things, just trying to do more of the same things, is not necessarily going to be producing the results that we need. Clearly, I think that from this, Senator Flake and my teams are starting to see a strategy for the Senate that we can advocate with our colleagues. But it's a serious alarm for me, and Senator Flake has heard me on this rant before, that we don't have State Department officials here. We're not able to ask them if they have a strategy. I don't know if they do. They don't have a diplomatic reach there. It raises serious alarms that America could be more precise in achieving the ends for the great people of Somalia. And I just want to ring that bell one more time, that this is very, very troublesome to me, that we have an area of the world that is in serious crisis, from humanitarian crisis, environmental crisis, and more immediate for the United States of America, it's serious security concerns for our country as well as theirs. And I'm hoping that we'll see with the new Secretary of State, perhaps, concern for Africa. I mean, from the Congo to Somalia to South Sudan, just not having the diplomatic resources necessary to help advance the cause of our country as well as the countries I've mentioned. With that, Senator Flake, I'm through.